$13 billion. That is the construction cost of USS Gerald R. Ford, the most powerful aircraft carrier ever assembled by any nation in human history. Nuclear reactor, 75 aircraft, a flight deck the size of 4 American football fields laid end to end, 5,000 sailors, 2 electromagnetic catapult systems that can launch a fully loaded FA-18E every 45 seconds around the clock. The Ford can project air power to any coast on Earth within 96 hours of leaving port. And it cannot enter the Persian Gulf. Not because of a mechanical failure, not because of an overcautious admiral hedging his career, because the geometry of the Strait of Hormuz converts $13 billion of American naval engineering into the most expensive stationary target on the planet. And the Pentagon has known this for years. So they sent Tripoli instead. That is the equation this video is about. Let us look at the geography first, because the geography is the entire argument. The Strait of Hormuz measures 21 nautical miles at its narrowest navigable point, 21 miles between the Iranian coastline and the coast of Oman. On a clear morning with good visibility, you can stand on the bridge of a warship transiting the strait and see both shores simultaneously. Now, place a 1,100 6-foot aircraft carrier inside that channel. USS Gerald R. Ford displaces 100,000 tons at full load. Its flight deck spans 252 feet in width. Operating safely at speed, making the kind of course corrections an aircraft carrier needs during flight operations, requires a navigable water corridor of at least 4 nautical miles. The moment you commit the Ford to a Hormuz transit, you have consumed nearly 1/5 of the available water, just keeping the ship maneuverable. And then, you have to hold it there. Flight operations require consistent headings into the wind. The Ford cannot sprint through the strait at 30 knots and exit on the far side in 45 minutes. It has to operate, which means it has to remain inside the strait, or just inside the Gulf beyond it, for hours at a time. In an area where Iran has spent 30 years engineering one specific problem. The IRGC Navy has positioned Fateh-class ballistic missiles along the Iranian coastline at multiple hardened sites between Bandar Abbas and Qeshm Island. The Fateh is a solid-fueled system, no liquid propellant to load, no extended pre-launch preparation window for a satellite to photograph. Canister to launch in under 10 minutes. Range, 300 kilometers. Warhead, 650 kilograms of high explosive. Against a fixed onshore target, the Fateh is a tactical weapon. Against a 1,100-foot ship holding a predictable heading inside a 21-mile funnel, the Fateh is a geometry problem with an obvious solution. Iran knows the solution. The IRGC also operates Khorramshahr mobile launchers, truck-mounted, highway-mobile, purpose-built to deny a fixed targeting solution to any adversary with overhead intelligence assets. You locate one battery through satellite imagery and schedule a strike. The truck is already on the coastal highway. The missile is already on a new pad. You have committed ordnance to destroy an empty patch of Iranian asphalt. And then there are the swarm boats. We covered IRGC fast attack craft in the video on the Hormuz Access Denial Network, the Thondar-class patrol vessels, and the Blade Runner hull speedboats that operate in formations of 20 to 50 hulls, armed with rocket-propelled grenades, recoilless rifles, and in some configurations, short-range anti-ship missiles. The relevant tactical number is this. The Persian Gulf, east of Hormuz, contains more than 1,200 islands, inlets, coves, and shallow water channels where a 14-foot speedboat can conceal itself and wait. An aircraft carrier cannot follow it there. The IRGC has had 3 decades to pre-position assets throughout those channels. The logistics of what that means, in terms of fuel, ammunition, maintenance infrastructure hidden across a fractured archipelago, is a targeting problem that requires months of systematic ISR work to even partially resolve, let alone neutralize. Now put the Ford back in that 21-mile channel and run the timeline. The Phalanx CIWS, the last-ditch rotary cannon mounted at multiple stations around a carrier's hull, fires 4,500 rounds per minute against incoming missiles in a terminal defense role. Against a single incoming missile on a predictable trajectory, the Phalanx is decisive. Against a coordinated salvo from 3 Fateh launchers firing simultaneously from different compass bearings, you are asking one tracking system per station to solve a multi-vector geometry problem in under 4 seconds while the ship is maneuvering. The Ford has 6 Phalanx mounts. The IRGC can launch from 12 positions at once. Here is the equation the Pentagon actually uses when it models a Ford-class Gulf entry scenario. An SM-6 interceptor, the primary long-range air defense missile aboard an Aegis escort destroyer, costs $5.3 million per round. A Fateh-class ballistic missile costs Iran approximately $800,000 to manufacture and field. That is already a 6.6 to 1 cost ratio in Iran's favor before a single shot is fired. But that ratio is not the number that matters. The number that matters is what Iran actually needs to achieve. Iran does not need to sink the Ford. Iran needs to hit the Ford once. One missile into the flight deck does not destroy a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. Modern carriers are engineered with extraordinary damage control capacity, multiple redundant systems, compartmentalized flooding control, fire suppression technology that did not exist on the carriers of World War II. One hit takes the Ford's flight deck out of combat operations for 6 to 18 months of repair. The flight deck is the most operationally critical and simultaneously most exposed real estate on the ship. It is not armored like a battleship. It is optimized entirely for aircraft operations. Fuel lines running under the deck, ordnance elevators connecting the magazine to the flight line, arresting gear, catapult tracks, aircraft spotted in rotating cycles across a 4.5-acre surface area permanently exposed to the sky. You do not need to sink the ship. You need to crater the deck. One hit. Iran has spent $800,000. The United States has lost $13 billion of combat capacity for a year and a half. The cost asymmetry is not 6 to 1. It is 16,000 to 1. I spent time going through the congressional testimony and RAND modeling documents that followed the 2002 Millennium Challenge exercise, the war game in which a retired Marine general named Paul Van Riper effectively simulated sinking 16 U.S. Navy ships in the Persian Gulf in a single afternoon, using asymmetric tactics that the computer models of the Blue Force refused to fully account for. The exercise was reset. Van Riper resigned in protest. The Navy declared the results non-representative. What most people remember about Millennium Challenge is the score. What the analysis actually shows is the method. Van Riper relayed targeting data through motorcycle couriers and lighthouse signal lamps because he knew U.S. electronic warfare would intercept any radio communication. He bypassed the most sophisticated jamming capability in the inventory with a system that cost essentially nothing and had no electronic signature to suppress. The expensive tool lost to the cheap idea. That pattern repeats across every asymmetric engagement we have examined on this channel. And it is the pattern that makes the Ford's Hormuz geometry a problem with no clean solution unless you look at the other ship. Type Tripoli in the comments if you think this geometry changes everything about how the U.S. Navy plans carrier operations. The operation was not built around the Ford's constraints. It was engineered around the Tripoli's specific advantages. USS Tripoli. Hull number LHA-7. America-class amphibious assault ship, commissioned 2020. At 45,000 tons full load displacement, the Tripoli is 45% of the Ford's mass. Its flight deck runs 844 feet versus the Ford's 1,106. In a standard configuration, it carries Marines, landing craft, and a mixed air wing of helicopters and tilt-rotor aircraft for amphibious assault operations. On paper, it is the smaller, less capable ship. Here's the detail that makes this extraordinary. The Tripoli can enter the Strait of Hormuz safely. Its draft is shallower. Its turning radius fits inside the Gulf's primary navigable channels, without the geometry constraints that make supercarrier operations inside the strait tactically untenable. And in its current deployment configuration, the configuration that Navy planners built this operation around, the Tripoli is not carrying Marines. It is carrying F-35Bs. The F-35B is the short takeoff, vertical landing variant of the Joint Strike Fighter. It does not require a catapult launch system. It does not require arresting gear to recover. It departs from a ski jump ramp or an adequate deck run and recovers vertically if the situation demands, hovering on its lift fan like an oversized helicopter with a 5th-generation radar and a full internal weapons bay. An F-35A, the conventional variant, requires 8,000 feet of prepared runway or a carrier catapult to get airborne. An F-35B needs approximately 500 feet of deck run under normal operational conditions. What this means in the Hormuz tactical picture: the Tripoli, operating from a position inside the Persian Gulf, places its F-35Bs approximately 80 nautical miles from Bandar Abbas, 60 nautical miles from the IRGC missile battery concentrations on Keshem Island, and 45 nautical miles from the fast attack boat infrastructure at Larak Island. At 80 nautical miles, an F-35B is on target in under 8 minutes from wheels up. Now compare that to the Ford's strike geometry. The Ford is positioned in the northern Arabian Sea, outside Hormuz, outside Iran's primary A/AD envelope, outside the Fateh missile range. From that operating position, the Ford's F/A-18E Super Hornets fly a combat mission profile to Bandar Abbas of approximately 600 nautical miles each way. At cruise power, that is 1 hour inbound, 1 hour outbound, minimum. The FA-18E burns roughly 14,000 pounds of fuel per hour in military power configuration. By the time a Super Hornet reaches the Iranian coastline on a standard strike package, it has already spent more than half its usable combat radius on the transit. That is a significant constraint, not a fatal one, but a constraint that shapes what missions the Ford can execute and at what tempo. The Ford is not irrelevant to this fight. The Ford is the long-range strike arm. Ford's aircraft are tasked with hitting hardened targets deep inside Iranian territory, the radar and command infrastructure in the Zagros foothills, the missile manufacturing sites that require heavy precision-guided ordnance, the air defense systems that cover the approaches to Tehran. These are missions that require range, payload, and the Ford's ability to surge 40 sorties a day from a position where no IRGC missile can reach. But for the strait itself, for the fast attack boats hiding in shallow water channels, for the Khorramshahr mobile launchers moving along coastal roads at night, for the Fateh batteries and the Hajar mountain ridgeline above the shoreline, you need something inside the Gulf. Closer, more responsive. You need the Tripoli, and you need it forward. The obstacle planners had to solve was not strategic in nature. It was logistical, and it had a specific time cost. The Tripoli had deployed in an amphibious assault configuration, partially. Its hangar deck was divided between F-35B maintenance infrastructure and equipment for an amphibious mission package that was subsequently canceled before execution. Reconfiguring that hangar for sustained, fixed-wing air operations, repositioning support equipment, certifying the ordnance handling procedures for a full strike loadout, completing crew familiarization for a mixed team that had not trained together in this exact configuration, required 72 hours of continuous work. 72 hours of work on an anchored or slow-moving ship inside a contested strait before the air wing that would suppress the threats to that ship was certified combat ready. The solution was to complete the reconfiguration in the Gulf of Oman, east of Hormuz, outside the Fateh engagement envelope, and delay the Gulf entry until the F-35B air wing passed its combat readiness certification, which meant accepting a 72-hour gap in the operational timeline before the Tripoli was in position to execute its primary mission. That decision was correct and uncomfortable in equal measure. The comfortable alternative, entering the Gulf immediately and finishing the reconfiguration inside the threat envelope, traded 72 hours of positioning for an unknown additional exposure duration. The planners chose the known cost. The 72-hour delay had consequences we will return to. Subscribe to NavyStrikeforce, because what we just showed you is not a tactical footnote. It is a carrier doctrine problem the U.S. Navy has been trying to solve since the Ford was commissioned, and this deployment is the answer they settled on. Here is how the full system works once both ships are on station, because the system only makes sense when you see both halves of the equation simultaneously. The Ford holds position approximately 200 nautical miles south-southwest of Hormuz in the Arabian Sea. Its escort package, 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers with the latest Spy 6 radar upgrade, 1 Ticonderoga-class cruiser, and 2 Los Angeles-class attack submarines running ahead of the group, submerged, forms the outer defensive layer. This is the force architecture, standard carrier strike group. But the Ford's most important contribution to the Gulf operation is not the Super Hornets. It is the EA-18G Growler. The EA-18G is the electronic warfare variant of the Super Hornet airframe. It carries the AN/ALQ-99 jamming pod alongside the newer next-generation jammer system. Operating at 40,000 feet from the Ford's Arabian Sea position, an EA-18G radiates into the Iranian coastal radar network across an effective jamming range of approximately 300 nautical miles, depending on terrain masking and atmospheric conditions. 300 nautical miles from the Ford's operating position places the Growler's jamming envelope over every radar site between Bandar Abbas and Bushehr. Here's the equation that changes everything. The Fateh ballistic missile uses GPS-aided inertial navigation for its terminal guidance phase. That guidance is robust and difficult to spoof. But the fire control process, the sensor network that provides the launcher crew with a targeting solution in the first place, that tells them where the ship is, what bearing to set, what time of flight correction to apply, that process runs through Iran's coastal radar and targeting infrastructure. Jam the sensors. The Fateh fires at a probability distribution, not a ship. The Khorramshahr mobile launcher has the same problem. The truck moves, the crew sets up, the radar provides a targeting solution, the crew launches. Remove the reliable targeting data from the equation, and you have a sophisticated ballistic missile system firing based on its last known target position, which is no longer accurate because the Tripoli has moved. Iran built a layered coastal defense strategy around the assumption that radar-based targeting would remain functional throughout a conflict. The Growler's specific purpose is to make that assumption wrong. The convergence equation. Tripoli's F-35Bs execute close-range strikes from 80 miles inside the Gulf, while the Ford's EA-18G Growlers suppress the radar network that would allow Iran to target the Tripoli with the same missiles the F-35Bs are destroying on the ground. The Ford cannot enter the Gulf. Its electronic warfare aircraft can operate over it. The two ships are not competing for the mission. They are a single system with a 200 nautical mile separation between its two halves. What is most surprising about this arrangement is not the technology involved. Both the F-35B and the EA-18G have been in service for years. What is surprising is the planning assumption it reveals about how the U.S. Navy has quietly reframed the supercarrier's role in a contested, literal environment. It did not announce this reframing. There was no press conference, no congressional testimony explicitly stating that a Ford-class carrier will not operate as the primary strike platform inside a defended strait. The deployment pattern is the statement. Here is a take that will probably draw disagreement. The USS Gerald R. Ford may be the last nuclear supercarrier the U.S. Navy actually commits to a contested, close-range literal fight as the primary strike platform. The evidence from this deployment suggests that future planning will treat the supercarrier as a long-range support asset, delivering deep strike capability and electronic warfare coverage from outside the primary threat envelope, while forward deploying lighter, higher-risk hulls into the close fight. The Ford costs $13 billion to build, $2.5 million per day to operate at sea. The Tripoli costs $4 billion to build, $900,000 per day. If the Tripoli is the hull that enters the threat envelope, that accepts the exposure, that does the close-in work, then the Pentagon is writing a new operational doctrine in real time. The supercarrier as the supporting actor, not the lead. That is not the doctrine that justified building Ford-class carriers. It is the doctrine that the Strait of Hormuz is producing. Looking at this shift with some distance, what this deployment tells us is not that the Ford is obsolete. It tells us that the threat environment inside the Strait has outpaced the risk calculus that once justified committing a supercarrier to contested shallow water operations. That shift took 30 years of sustained Iranian investment and precisely the asymmetric tools designed to make that calculus unacceptable. Cheap missiles, mobile launchers, swarm tactics, geography weaponized. The strategy worked, not by defeating the carrier, but by making entering the Strait a political and financial risk the U.S. was unwilling to accept. What would you decide at CENTCOM? Running this calculation at 2 a.m., knowing the operational advantage of having the Ford inside the Gulf, knowing the cost if a single Fateh missile finds its flight deck. That calculation is not clean. It was never supposed to be. Comment Doctrine. If you think the U.S. Navy just rewrote carrier operations doctrine in real time and will never go back, now return to the 72-hour delay. The Tripoli completed its hangar reconfiguration and received F-35B combat readiness certification at 0340 on a Tuesday morning, after 72 consecutive hours of sustained deck work by a crew running on rotation shifts and very little margin for error. The first F-35B section launched on a Keshem Island strike mission 6 hours after that certification was signed. During those 72 hours of reconfiguration, while the Tripoli was holding position in the Gulf of Oman before the air wing that would protect it was operational, the IRGC fired twice. Both shots were Fateh-class ballistic missiles. Both were targeted at the Tripoli. The first was intercepted by an SM-2 surface-to-air missile from the escort destroyer USS Chung-hoon, operating approximately 8 nautical miles ahead of the Tripoli's position. The intercept was clean. The second was destroyed by close-in defensive fire at shorter range, closer than the intercept geometry that planners had modeled as the standard engagement envelope. Neither missile hit, but both missiles were possible because the Tripoli had entered the Gulf before its air wing was ready to suppress the launchers that fired them. The 72-hour reconfiguration delay that planners accepted as the controlled, cautious option, the decision that kept the ship safer in the Gulf of Oman while the work was done, still left a window. A window the IRGC identified and used. The obstacle planners designed around created the vulnerability they had to survive. It almost cost the ship. Both intercepts succeeded. The margins were not wide. This is not a clean equation. It was never built to be. Every operational plan has friction. The 72-hour delay produced the specific friction it was designed to reduce. The alternative would have produced different friction, probably worse. The planners made the right call. They survived it by a narrower margin than the briefing slides projected. Those 4 IRGC battery sites on Keshem Island, the 2 that fired, and 2 others that intelligence had located during the reconfiguration hold, were eliminated by F-35B strikes within 4 hours of those launch events. The targeting data had been developed during the 72-hour wait. The strikes were clean. The Khorramshahr mobile launchers that had not yet been located were still mobile by the time the first operational cycle was complete. They remain a factor. Fast attack boat infrastructure in the shallower inlets north of Hormuz survived the first operational cycle largely intact. The F-35Bs had a priority target list, and the boat pens were on the secondary tasking sheet. That decision reflected the operational calculus correctly, It also left a capability in place. One more detail that has stayed with me reviewing this operation. The F-35B pilot who flew the first Keshem strike returned to the Tripoli with 200 pounds of fuel above the minimum recovery threshold. That margin sounds like safety. In the context of a combat mission, where the pilot had stretched the outbound transit and extended time on target by 90 seconds to complete a terminal targeting pass at lower altitude, it is not safety. It is the edge of the engineering equation, held precisely. 200 pounds above minimum. The math was correct. Barely. War is full of barely. The equation holds until it doesn't, and then you find out what the next variable is. Here's what remains open. The Strait of Hormuz is more accessible now than it was before this deployment. It is not open. The mobile launcher threat has not been fully resolved. The fast attack boat infrastructure in the northern shallows is degraded, not eliminated. And the deeper strategic question, the one that outlasts this specific operational deployment, is the question of what comes after the Tripoli. The America class has 2 ships in commissioned service, USS America and USS Tripoli. A third, USS Bougainville, is under construction with a projected commissioning date several years out. There is no reserve Tripoli on the shelf. There is no surge option if this hull is damaged. Every doctrine produces a second-order problem. The problem the Nimitz-era doctrine produced was cost asymmetry. A carrier worth $13 billion against a missile worth $800,000. The Tripoli doctrine's second-order problem is replacement cost and timeline. The hull designed to be more operationally acceptable to risk than the Ford is still a $4 billion ship that requires years to replace, and a trained crew that requires years to develop. The equation shifts. It does not disappear. You have changed the variable, not the underlying asymmetry. What the U.S. Navy has built at Hormuz, one supercarrier in the Arabian Sea, providing long-range strike and electronic warfare coverage, one assault carrier inside the Gulf providing close air support and threat suppression, is not a permanent doctrine. It is an answer to a specific threat geometry at a specific moment. Will this become the standing model? Supercarrier as support, light carrier as spear, for how the United States projects carrier power into contested littoral environments? Comment yes or no, because the answer determines the next generation of U.S. naval procurement, the shipbuilding budget for the 2030s, and whether the Navy keeps ordering Ford-class hulls at $13 billion each, or pivots toward lighter platforms that can enter the spaces where the wars are actually happening. The strait is 21 nautical miles wide. The Ford is outside it. The Tripoli is not. That 21-mile gap between the 2 ships is not a tactical detail. It is the new geometry of carrier power projection. Every naval staff in the world, Beijing, Moscow, Riyadh, New Delhi, is running this equation right now and drawing its own conclusions about what the U.S. Navy is willing to risk and what it has decided it is not. Subscribe to NavyStrikeforce. We don't celebrate weapons. We calculate whether they work, and the calculation at Hormuz is far from finished. The next video in this series covers the electronic warfare layer in detail, what the Ford's Growlers are actually doing to Iranian targeting systems, and why the answer changes the entire threat picture for Chinese naval planners watching from the South China Sea. We don't worship the machine. We worship the equation. The equation is still running.